This is Can You Believe It? Welcome to our second episode on how did we get here and why can we not get along with each other? That was a question that Rodney King asked back in the 1990s. We have been trying to unwrap and to understand the issue of race as we know it today by asking the question, how did we get here? How did we get to be where we are today when it comes to the racial tensions that we see today? How did it start? My responsibility is to make an attempt by digging deep from our past to understand where we got it all wrong. In our introductory episode, we concluded by stating that for the last 500 years or so, we have been taught by a consortium of intellectuals and philosophers, statesmen, business and economic leaders, and their books that human racial biology is real and that we are different both inwardly and outwardly from each other, and that certain races, or rather, certain people, are created biologically better than others. We are going to therefore look back at this crazy history of race in an attempt to unearth the truth because here at Can You Believe It? We purpose to search for truth from wherever it can be found and to analyze that truth from all angles so that we can be able to make informed and educated conclusions. See, the false teaching that some people are created and some people are more superior or created with superior qualities than others is a bunch of baloney, or as my friend used to say, it's slicing the baloney too thin. Believe it or not, the myth of racism, and some are better than others, has led to major injustices over the years. So many people have been hurt. For instance, we know of the suffering of the Jewish people under the regime of Hitler in Nazi Germany. We are familiar with the sufferings of the natives in the Americas and during the expansion of the Spanish Inquisition. We are familiar with the sufferings of the blacks, the Native Americans, and the Red Indians, and other communities during the colonial times, all in the name of a history that roots back to the 1400s, or even maybe even back, farther back. We are familiar with the sufferings of the African Americans during slavery, for instance. No one with a proper mind and who's a good researcher can deny the sufferings of the Jews and other non-Jewish Europeans and Europeans as well during the reign of the Nazis in Germany. We know what we're talking about when we reference the sufferings of the Africans in Arabia in the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, even to the current day. The stain of racism and selfishness is real around the world. Some of us may even have seen some painful clips from Asia during the COVID-19 period. Some of us may have seen some of those videos from Russia and in Ukraine as we vividly saw discrimination of all kinds. We in the Americas are not exempt from this disease. It wasn't long ago when the name of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and more became a national story. We have a problem that is deeply rooted in our history and the stories we tell each other about others who might not look like we look in our dining tables. And it is time we kind of talked about the truth. Let's expose some of these lies that we've had over the past. Those of us who are from the African continent are not exempt from racism and tribalism. Some of the stories coming from Africa are the Hutus and the Tutsis. That's not far behind us. We know about it. The struggle of the people in the Sudan and in Chad, in South Africa, in Kenya, in Zimbabwe, and other parts of the continent. These struggles are real. The hatred in these regions are rooted in some cases in the distribution of resources, where often one tribe or one group of people carves the majority of the resources meant to benefit millions to benefit only a few or one region or a particular tribe. This tribal hatred is not different from the racism we find in the West. It is founded on the same principle of greed and selfishness and the creation of a myth or a paradigm that portrays one group to be better or more deserving of privileges than the others. We have painted the canvas with the wrong paint. We've painted the canvas with a lie, and it is time to expose the lie. Many of us are familiar with most of our basic policies that seem to guard the myth of race. These policies were developed as a way of keeping some of the political and religious leaders and their followers in control, and to make others become servants and to serve the interests of others. Sad but true, much of this history helped propel and push forward the establishment of the Spanish Inquisition in the 1400s and the establishment of the colonial policies in the British and the French colonies in Africa and in the West Indies and the Caribbean. This mindset helped the establishment of slavery and the anti-immigration policies of yesterday that are experienced today. Over the last 500 years or so, many of our so-called intellectuals and their books have created the story of racism and the myth of race. These so-called intellectuals developed the initial idea of race mostly in the Western society and solidified the attitudes and the beliefs of many people who eventually and gradually followed their lies. They followed the myth. This false philosophy has found roots under the influence of economic and political policies and social policies of many in the Western world. For example, let's consider one of these influential people that spearheaded the myth of race. About 100 years ago, a German American anthropologist by the name of Franz Boas, who died in 1999, I was in the United States by then. All right. Frank Boas was born in 1858, just a few years before my grandfather. Boers came up with an alternative explanation of why people from different areas or people living under certain conditions behaved differently from one another. For your information, Boas was educated in the University of Bonn in 1877 through 1879. He was also educated in Heidelberg University and also University of Kiel in Germany. Frank Boas argued that people have divergent life histories. True that. Different shared experiences. True that. And people have grown with distinctive ways of relating to these differences. I agree with that. We have different life histories and different shared experiences with distinctive ways of relating to these differences. Nobody can argue with that. So far, I agree with Frank Boas's conclusions. Yes, we all have a worldview that is unique to each one of us, and we relate by sharing experiences from our worldviews. We have cultures that influence who we are and how we live with each other. But listen to this. In 1942, not long ago, Ashley Montagu, a British American anthropologist who was a student of Frank Boas, claimed that there are no races but only clines. Well, what's a cline, you ask? A cline is a gradation in the frequency of a trait between populations living in different geographic regions. Well, these traits were considered to be racial, and that these traits are distributed independently depending upon the many environmental and behavioral factors found in certain geographical regions. That's the twist right there. That these traits were considered to be racial, and that the traits are distributed independently depending upon the environment and the behavioral factors found in a certain geographical region. Now, see how the beginning of the lie will be cleverly twisted to fit in an agenda or the interest of some. For example, Montagu, who was born in 1905 in London, educated in Columbia University and the University of London, argued that skin color is related to the amount of solar radiation that a person receives, right? For example, dark skin, he argued, is found in Africa, India, and Australia, even though we know that genetic traits usually do not correlate with one another and are not distributed in the same place or in the same way over time. But that was Montagu's argument. But we also know that we humans are more similar to each other as a group of human beings than we are to one another within any particular racial or genetic category. This is simple logic. In fact, modern studies do show that each human gene is only a single player in a wondrous and an intricate drama involving non addictive interactions of genes, proteins, food, hormones, and life experiences and learning, which all of these factors interact with each other to affect us on different levels cognitively, including our behavioral functions. Each human gene has an effect on multiple types of human behaviors, and this we can all agree that the many behaviors that are affected by many genes are as well as other factors that we know and do not know, right? Therefore, we can make the assumption that a single gene is causative or is responsible for a certain trait can only lead to making unwarranted conclusions if we argue that way. If you argue that a single gene is causative or responsible for a certain trait, can only lead us to make unwarranted conclusions. Obviously, making an overinterpretation of any genuine genetic linkage rather. I think this is just simple logic, and one does not need to be a nuclear physicist to know this. But let's slow down and look at how race is defined in biological terms. In biological terms, the concept of race is integrally bound to the process of the formation of new species with some specific differentiations. In biology, a species is defined as a population of individuals who are able to mate and have variable offspring who are also successful in reproducing. Rather, a group of living organisms consisting of similar individuals capable of exchanging genes or interbreeding for that matter. So, based on this definition, a definition that is not inspired at all, based on the definition, the question for us is this: do biological races therefore exist? Do biological races exist among human beings today? I argue that biological races do not exist among humans today, and they've never existed in the past. My argument is that race is not part of our biology, but it is definitely part of our past and part of our modern culture. Race and racism are deeply ingrained in our society as myth. Racism and bigotry are fueled by deep seated hatred and intolerance of human variation and are not supported by any empirical evidence or modern science. This is, can you believe it? Join me next week as we continue this interactive and this interesting series on the myth of race and how did we get here. We are committed to pursuing truth from wherever it may be found, and our responsibility as educated and as intelligent human beings who have the image of God, our responsibility as humans is to take a deep dive to the ocean floor and scoop some fine sand under that pressure and bring it up to the surface for inspection. We do this because all truth is God's truth, no matter where you find it. Don't miss the next episode as you explore the teachings of Richard Popkin in the 1700s. Kindly subscribe to receive future episodes. Also, you're welcome to push back on the content or to ask follow up questions. We cannot suppress truth if we believe that all truth is God's truth, right? Have a good one.